Going.
Okay. Let's keep going.
There you go. We're going. Okay. So we're going to try to integrate Yoni's suggestion, Bezrat Hashem. If this wasn't hard enough, if this material wasn't complicated enough, we're going to try to bring it down a level to a practical perspective, some practical components. So we'll do our best. So the Rambam in Hilchos Geneva and Perek Zayin. Hashoka lechavero b'mishkolos chaseros. If someone measures out in the context of a sale, he's selling someone something. If he measures out with a measurement which is lacking, right? A classic scale works by putting the thing that's being sold on one side of the scale and weights on another side of the scale. And when it's balanced out, you know, according to how many weights you have to put on the opposing side of the scale, what the cost is. So if the weights are being presented as one weight, as 10 pounds, for example, but they're really 8 pounds, so you are overcharging the customer. So that's a mishkal chaser. Hamishkal shehiskimu olav b'nei osa hamedina. They're not predetermined by the Torah. The Torah doesn't determine what weights you have to use or don't have to use, but they're determined by convention, by the places in which people live. And the same applies if you measure out in volume with a measuring vessel that's lacking. So it says on the cup, right? But it's really 3/4 of a cup. Yeah. Over below tase. This is about Mishkal Ubam Sorah. That's a pasuk in Sefer Vayikra in Parshas Kedoshim. We'll get to in a few weeks. But do not create perversions in judgment, in the measurement, in the weights, or in this word Mesorah is a unique word in Lashon HaKodesh. It's referring to measurements that measure out liquid, just like regular, conventional kli. That's Perek Zayin, the beginning of Perek Ches, the following chapter. Mitzvahs aseh letzadek hamaoznayim. It is a positive commandment, letzadek, to justify the ma'oznayim, the scales, v'hamishkolos, and the weights, v'hamidos, and the measurements, yafe, very, very accurately. Ledakdek becheshbonan, and to be very, very specific. Pedantic, is that the word? To be very specific and accurate in the details of the calculations for how much these measurements are supposed to be. B'shas hasiyasan, as you are making them, meaning the person in charge of fashioning these cup measurements and the weights has to be very, very careful. Shneimar ma'oznei tzedek, avnei tzedek, efas tzedek. It lists all these different types of measuring tools. There's a pasuk in Sefer Devarim. Same thing for measuring land. Anything, right? They had ropes for measuring land, right? The length of a rope, and so one guy would stand at one end, and the guy would stand at another end. They would tighten it, and they would do another measurement. And according to that measurement, that's how they would measure out the land. Then he lists the different procedures that need to be done for the different types of measurements and how they're fashioned. The ropes have to be fashioned in a certain way, and the cups have to measure in a certain way, etc., etc. So the end of the chapter, halacha chaf, chayavin beis. It is the collective responsibility of the whole community. The term in Chazal, beis din, doesn't mean only the actual court of 3 people. It means the community at large. Lahamid shotrim b'chol medina, to appoint messengers. We use the word shoter to refer to a police officer, but it means an officer of the court in every city, ub'chol pelech, and in every region. That it is their job to check that the weights and measures that are being used are in fact accurate. That any of their measurements or any of their weights or any of their cup measurements are inaccurate, to punish them or to fine them, according to what Beis Din sees fit. Anything that is a fixed commodity with a fixed price, like today that would be oil and gas or something like that. Things that are commodities that have an international price rate, and anyone that disrupts that is also violating this idea. But we see from here very interestingly, this idea of weights and measures is something that, first of all, it's a negative commandment. It's a sin, obviously, to pervert the measurements. But in addition to this negative commandment, there's also a positive commandment to communally, collectively, everyone together has to make sure that the weights and measures that are being used are in fact accurate. It's a communal effort. So it's not just on the individual seller to make sure that his scales are accurate, but it's also collectively to make sure that the measurements that are being used are in fact accurate. Now, it's very, very interesting about this. Can I have the Tanakh there for just 1 second? Thank you. This mitzvah, or these two mitzvahs, appear twice in the Torah. One is in Parashas Kedoshim, and the other, the second pasuk that we quoted, is in Parashas Kiteitzei, at the very, very end of Parashas Kiteitzei. Now, what's at the end of Parashas Kiteitzei? We read that a few weeks ago. We read the end of Parashas Kiteitzei right. The very end of Parashas Kiteitzei is Zachar Sasher Salach Amalek. But what comes right before that section is this mitzvah. This mitzvah. Yeah. Excuse me, I'm already in Sefer Yoshua. Went a little bit too far. Hold on.
You go fast in this.
Yes. You go very fast in this. The pasuk says, "Lo yelecha bechisacha even va'even." You should not have in your pocket a stone and a stone. What does that mean, a stone and a stone? Meaning the accurate stone, and then the stone that looks like the accurate stone, but actually isn't accurate in terms of its weight. Don't have two stones. Gedolo katana. Lo yelecha bebeitzacha eva va'eva. You can't even have in your house, in your possession. The Gemara in Ksubos talks about this. Things that have the potential to create inaccuracies, you can't even own. To own them is a prohibition. It gives the example of a sefer she'eno mugha, like a sefer Torah that was written inaccurately, but it looks like a regular sefer Torah, and someone's going to read it and think, oh, the pasuk says this and this, but really it's inaccurate. You can't even own it. Like, just to have it in your possession is a problem. So don't have in your house the measurement and the wrong measurements. Huh?
Would that go in Pasuk Tzitzis? No.
Why psul tzitzis? You're saying that it's like,
look good and it's like
that's an interesting point. Could be that it's included. This is covering anything that on the surface of it, superficially, looks like it's okay and could bring people to a mistake, to an error. And this will ensure your sustainability on the land. Because God is disgusted by all who commit these types of crimes. Anyone who causes perversions in judgment. That's the end. Next pasuk. Remember what the Amalekites did to you as you were leaving Egypt. Now, it's not a coincidence. It's not like God said, oh, by the way, I forgot about the Amalekite story. Let me just slide that in the end. That's right. The fact that these two things are juxtaposed to each other is a very, very powerful idea. And if we zoom out a little bit, just to think conceptually about what is this idea of having the right measurements. Basically, if you're going to sum it up in one sentence, the rules are the one thing that have to be immutable. If the rules aren't immutable, they're not rules. Right? Another more cynical way that this is often phrased is the person who has the power over rules can never lose. Because they'll just change the rules, right? There could be rules, but if the rules are able to be manipulated, then it's not possible, right? This is one of the criticisms that are often put on the current financial system, that there are people, essentially, right? Not necessarily one person, but there are groups of people in the world that have control over the supply of things, over the supply of money specifically. They had a dollar isn't equal a dollar really equal 97 cents. Yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. The point I'm trying to make is that the rules have to be something that is fixed and immutable, and it's the thing that allows all integration to be possible. Any cooperation, any collaboration has to be within a framework of ma'aznei tzedek, that the scales are righteous. Literally means righteous, like a tzaddik. You could have a tzaddik person, and you could have a tzaddik scale. It's the same word. You have to have a righteous scale. In order for any cooperation or collaboration to be possible, you need a righteous scale, which is why this mitzvah is unique. It's not so unique. There are other mitzvahs like this, but this mitzvah has the negative commandment aspect, meaning it is forbidden to alter the measurements. But it's also the positive commandment that collectively we all have to do our part to ensure that these things are happening, that the ma'aznei tzedek, that the scales are just. Yeah, because again, it is the basis, it is the framework in which all integration and collaboration takes place. Yeah, and again, this is not necessarily the topic of the conversation, but the fact that the message of Amalek comes after this. I mean, there are many things that can be said about this, but most fundamentally, the underlying theme of Amalek, or perhaps even more accurately, the theology of the Amalekites, is one of existential pessimism. Yeah, which basically is saying that at the end of the day, at the bottom of it all, there is no order. There's no absolutes at the bottom of it. So you could pretend that there are scales, you could pretend that there are measures, you can pretend that there's good and bad, you can pretend that, but when you get to the bottom, there's nothing. There's nothing really there. So the idea of maintaining just measures is, in a way, it's the counter to the Amalekite worldview of there's really no scales and measures. All your scales and measures are just subjective constructs. Yeah, they say no, they're not subjective constructs; they're actually real, and there's a mitzvah to determine to keep them and to maintain their accuracy. So am I losing weight? Huh? That I can't help you with. Mizrat Hashem, I think. Well, right. The question, in order to be able to answer that question, you need to make sure that the scale is saying the same thing all the time, right?
This gives away sort of a breakdown in society that there's no more trust in any system.
Right. So we talk. I would say that when we talk about trust in institutions. So what are we saying? We're saying that the institutions aren't enforcing an objective system. They're kind of just doing things at whim. That would be another way of saying that. I think. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's right. Lack of trust in systems is just saying that people wave around their authority at whim without really enforcing an objective system. So all this was for purposes of introduction. For the os kaf. So as we've been talking about with every single letter until this point, that the letters in Lashon HaKodesh have names, and the names mean things, and they always have, or almost always have multiple connotations. But I think that the connotation that kind of is at the center, which all the other components kind of evolve around, is the kaf ma'oznayim. The thing that holds each side of the scale is called a kaf. That's what it's called. Kaf ma'oznayim. The hands of the scale. What's the word? Is there what? Right. It's the same word for the palm of the hand. But is there a specific word in English for the vessels on each side of the scale? I'm not sure. Yeah. If you think about it, just shout it out. So it's this idea of measurement, not necessarily measurement in the context of din and judgment, and like that's a theme in and of itself, but the idea of weights and measures as the framework that allows integration to take place. That, I think, in summary, is like the underlying theme of everything that we're going to see in the Kaf. This was a hard one, by the way. It was a hard one for me to kind of wrap my head around all the different points that the Rab brings up, but we'll do our best, and we might even be able to have some concrete takeaways in the end. So says the Rav, Ba'im heim ha mahutim hane'arachim ze leumas ze. The essences that had become ordered are now pitched, this one before this one. So what is this alluding to? We talked about in the last letter that Yud is the completion of a set unit. Yeah, tests are all the different components. That's what we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago. Test means because there are fundamentally 9 different components to any phenomenon, as we explained. Yud is the idea that all of those different components, all those different elements, are now working in unison and can form a unit. So when we talk about how the two essences are ne'arachim zelu mazeh, means you have two yuds that are focused to each other. Now it's true that the kaf doesn't appear in the shape of two yuds, but it's the idea that two sets of 10 being 20, are now pitched together. They're facing each other. Bochol seruf klalusam, their generalities, ubochol yikras erech pratiusam, and in the value of their specificities. This fundamental tension between the collectiveness and the specificness, the pratiyut, is a huge theme in Rav Kook in general, but it's for sure a theme within this sefer in particular. The idea of the collective as an entity in and of itself, facing the particulars that form the klal, the collective. So the two yuds, the two entities, being the pratim and the klalim. Lidei starfut erkit, that they want to now come to a tseruf in the domain of value, meaning an existential or perhaps moral connection, being bound to each other. Shahakaf hamikabelet et tchunat hamishkal v'ha'aracha hamashve ba lepu'uloteha. The kaf, this vessel, we haven't yet found the word for it in English, but the vessel. What? Sorry, the pan. Okay, the pan of the scale holds the tchunot, the aspects hamishkal v'ha'aracha of value hamashve ba lepu'uloteha, that allow it to be equal in their functions. Pu'uloteha. Together with the technical technite, you see, with the technical components that are revealed in the other kaf. So what he's saying over here is that there's the pu'ula. He's referring to this idea of the pu'ula. There's the movement or the act in the world, and then there's the components of the act. I remember many years ago when I began to learn martial arts, so they would always break down every single move into its components, and you would spend days just focusing on the one component. Okay, so the kick, how you do a kick? Well, there's many different components. So first step is like you lift your leg up like you're stepping on a step, and you just practice that, stepping on a step. We would all look like a bunch of idiots, right? Just lifting your leg straight up on a 90-degree angle, right? That's the component, and then you learn the next component, and then you learn the next component. But if you would do that, as Rav Kook is going to say, if you look at an action just as the breakdown of its components, there's no flow there. There's no flow. There has to be a continuity of the components. So he's going to get to this idea. Shereishita hi hakfiya hamachrachat et hitpashtut hakochit. So now Rav Kook brings in this additional connotation of the word kaf, which is milashon kfiya, to force something. Kofeh means to force. So there is an element of forcing et ha'itpashtut hakochit, out of the forces shalayitavut, of coming into being, lead galem b'tzura yidua, to take form in its proper way, b'tchuna meduyeket, in its exact formulation, al pi hachefetz v'hamigama hayisodit, according to the proper goal that it intends it. Hakaf b'tzurato koach hamif'al, the kaf in its form, lo hanituach shel ha'pu'ulot hamitpardot, is not alluding to the surgical separation of the pu'ulot hamitpardot, of the different components of the action. It is not alluding to that. Hamihavot hamitgalmot bepirkeim, in their different parak is like a breakdown of the thing. Hashonim v'hamuchulakim, distinct. Ki'im, rather, hofa'at ha'pu'ula v'hazrachta b'shetef chaya. Shetef, like flow. The flow. The kaf is I think it's the only letter that is perfectly round in all of its aspects. In fact, halachically, it's interesting to note that the difference between a kaf and a bet is that a kaf is round and a bet has corners. So even if a bet doesn't have the bottom right protrusion on the side, it doesn't have a tail, but it has a corner, it's still a valid bet. Wow. Yeah. The only distinction between the kaf and the bet is that the kaf is rounded and the bet has corners. So the fact that the kaf is round on all components of it, yeah, is alluding to this idea that the kaf is all of the aspects of a pu'ula, of a movement, in flow. So it's not the nituach. He describes this, it's just great language. The nituach means like surgically breaking down, like you dissect the thing and you break it into its parts. It's not the nituach. He said, we're done with the nituach. You have all the different pieces that came together. That's great. Now you have to put them in a flow. You have to have flow. And if you have flow, the letter is puzzle, right? The letter becomes invalid if it's not rounded. So this is like a central component of the letter kaf. Shu hofa achat. One unified hofa'ah, one unified revelation, mitgalgelet, which is rounded, b'chol ofaneha, in all of its aspects. Meaning, again, as we said, the kaf is round on all sides. Tofeset et harum ואת התחת בתפיסה חזקה ומעובה. That the bottom and the top, meaning the top parallel line and the bottom parallel line, are very thick and strong. As he's spoken about in other letters, right, the thickness of each part of the letter also has significance for Rav Kook. And he actually is making an explicit reference to what we talked about in Os Beis. Os Beis is a similar concept. He introduced this idea that the Os Beis has the thick top line and then paralleling the thick bottom line. And just to skip to the punchline, which is what he's going to say, that the just like by Os Beis, so the theme is that we need to be guarded from the forces up above and guarded from the forces down below. What are the forces up above? The forces up above are the ethereal and the spiritual that could be very inspiring, but the problem is that they distract from action. If we're caught up in the ethereal, if we're caught up in the theoretical, the spiritual domain, it precludes any possibility for action. So that's the protection, so to speak, from the top. What's the protection from the bottom? Protection from the bottom is a little bit more straightforward. The lower urges and drives and distractions that would also prevent someone from acting properly. So there needs to be both at the same time a protection from above and protection from the top. Protection from being too abstract and floating away, and the protection from being drawn down into crassness and distraction. There's also a chatzitza, a wall on the right side, but that chatzitza is more thin. It's not thick like the two parallel lines. It's thinner. That which is to the right of the revelation of this flow-like action. To the right means like the origin. We talked about the right being the origin of the thing and the left being the direction in which it's going. It starts from the right and goes towards the left. So the idea of the right means the source of the thing. So it's being protected, but not aggressively protected from the right. He's used this word before. Misifas it's a Greek word, but it's used by Chazal to describe like a thin partition. It's not a wall, but it's like a thin, like a lattice work type of thing. You can imagine that. Huh? Like a screen, yeah, something like that.
We used before.
Right. Kind of permeable, but not. So why is it being guarded gently from the right and to the left? It's completely open. So Rav Kook explains, Daya mechitza kala ke mechitzat habet hayimanit. You see, he's making explicit reference to it's a similar structure to the base. The base has the two thick lines that are paralleling each other, and then it has the thin partition to the right side of it. Aval harumba hatachat bechoskahim chotetzim. The top and the bottom are thick, and they guard in a strong way. Ha'hafrada mitzad ha'ilui o mitzad ha'shafel shelo liikanes bechug hamifalim. This is the point that I explained before. That in the same way that he explained by the bays, that there's a guarding from the top and a guarding from the bottom. A guarding from being too ethereal and being too abstract and being too spiritual, and also being guarded from the bottom, temptation and distraction. Hi eitana va'amudit. It is strong and stands firm. Chasina, it is impermeable. Kechosen hashamayim hamutzeket ki yitzikat haaretz. Very interesting language. I'm not sure if that's referring to something specific, but literally it means like the formed earth and the formed sky, that they take shape and they don't lose that fundamental form. That which has not yet been revealed to the flowy action, right? The flow of all the steps being put together, this flow aspect, that which has not yet been revealed, but will eventually be revealed, meaning that which is in a state of potential but not yet incorporated into the flowy poal thing. There's an opening, meaning the cup is opened to the left. So what he's describing is very interesting. He's saying that this flowiness, it allows the executor to be open to the future. In other words, to be dynamic. Meaning that flow, it allows two things. It allows the different components that you learned to now be incorporated together in a way that doesn't look rigid. Like you see someone dancing who doesn't know how to dance. I'm not talking about myself, God forbid, but someone who doesn't know how to there's this rigidity to it. It looks like a robot trying to it looks like the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz trying to walk down the streets, right? There's a rigidity there. What we wanted to achieve is flow. So the flow is being able to know, on the one hand, you're doing different actions, right? But all those actions are part of one flowing sequence. That's the one advantage that it gives you. The other advantage that it gives you, says Rav Kook, is it also allows you to be open. It allows you to be open to new things that are going to come and to be dynamic, to flow with them. That's the idea that the cuff is open to the left. Again, the left being the side of progression. You come from the right, we're going to the left. The cuff is open to the left. Hakaf yachnis. It will incorporate into its measurements, right? The measurements of the scale, and in the strength of its pu'ula, again, the flowy pu'ula, at kol tnuot kapayim asher yavo, all of the movements that will come, meaning anything that comes its way, it will be able to incorporate it. Asher yakumu v'yamodu, that will arise and stand before it. Mereshit ad acharit la'adei ad, from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, meaning it's open to any changes that come, and it can integrate and adapt. That was what I was looking for. It can adapt to all things that come. Kol ha'technika, all the technicalities. I'm just saying as an aside, it's interesting that he's using this word already at the time that Rav Kook is writing this. Right, these terms have like become part of modern Hebrew. This is over 100 years ago.
He may have innovated a few of them.
It could that could very well be, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Listen, as I say a bit of a tangent, it's known that that Rav Kook had a long relationship with Ben Yehuda, helping him compile the his dictionary.
Wasn't it Ben Yehuda that he ended up told him to do tshuva and then he went home and died?
Right. So the story that Simcha Raz tells over in his biography of Rav Kook, Malach Kivnei Adam, an angel among men, he says that that Ben Yehuda came around to Rav Kook's house right here on Rehov Yafo. He, in one of his many visits to his house, to ask him, the etymology of some word, where it's in the Tanakh, where it's in the Chazal, and they had this long conversation. And as Ben Yehuda is about to leave the house, so Rav Kook says to him, Ben Yehuda, maybe it's time you did tshuva. and he said, and he waits by the door, and he says, perhaps. And he walks out, and 2 days later he died. That's the story. That's the story that he tells over. So the person that was present, I believe, was Rav Aryeh. It was Rav Aryeh Levin. Wow. I think he tells over that story. I forget who was present, but it's told over in the name of the person who was present. All of the additional understanding of the person, right? That's a continuation of the last sentence, meaning any additional insights that need to be incorporated, right, are able to be incorporated. Again, so this flowiness is a really important thing. Right? The flowiness is good because it helps the different components that you learn be incorporated into one flow, right? That there's not this rigidity, right? This nituach, right? The technical dissection of each thing. Yeah, they're not able to flow, and also you're able to be more dynamic and be able to adapt to things that come, both in reality and conceptually. Right, the binaya terah, or insights that come, will be able to be integrated. So now we're going to do the exact opposite of what Rav Kook said to do, and we're going to break down each component in the Perush. Right, we're going to go point by point. But what can we do? Right, we have to break them down. We have to break them down, and hopefully by the end it'll be we'll loop it back around, and we'll get a flow. So, right, the first point that Rav Kook brings up, the idea of the kaf ma'oznaim, the idea of the scale. Right, this is the first connotation of the kaf. Right, shikul hadat shebein klal laprat. Right, the most fundamental weighing of the scales is the weighing between the individual and the collective. And again, I believe this theme is the mechanism that allows the individuals to be integrated into the collective. Meaning, you have rules, you've thought of the rules, you've thought of the proper measurements, you have the shikul hadat. It's interesting, in Lashon HaKodesh we call it shikul hadat, which literally means to weigh out ideas, to weigh them. Yeah, you weigh them one against the other. So you have these measurements and weights that you've weighed out, and this is the framework in which it takes place. And that allows the individual to incorporate into the collective, because if there's no rules, if there's no pathway for the individual to operate, then someone who's outside the system has no way of proceeding and developing. So the fundamental weighing out is always between the needs of the collective and the needs of the individual. Adam sheodeh lishkol la'achriya darko el ha'maaseh kala yoter v'lachen yesh kesher bein kaf ma'ozaim lepula kfiya va'asiyah. Right, that's very interesting. So this is a point that I want to talk out that we didn't yet. The thing that was coming to mind as I was reading this is that where does this tension between individuals and collectives is spoken out in the most fundamental way? In what way is it's spoken out in the most fundamental way? I think that the idea that we call in formal physics entropy is this idea of individuals, of individual aspects, individual components, not by their very nature, they don't want to integrate. In fact, one of the very good definitions of life, like from a scientific perspective, is an anti-entropic force. Meaning our bodies are made of many, many different components, right? Billions of cells, and those cells are made of, God knows how many atoms, right, and chemicals and molecules. By their very nature, they want to separate. They don't want to join together, right? The more powerful the physical force is required to keep things together that would otherwise want to separate, right? The atomic force, for example, why is it so powerful? Because it's keeping things together that don't want to be together. By their nature, they want to separate. Yeah. So it is a facet, I think, of reality. If you think about this, it is a facet of reality itself, of being itself, that individual things left to their own devices will float, will sleepwalk, so to speak, into an extreme, which makes them more and more and more incompatible with other things. Yeah. And then there is a joining force that has to have intentionality behind it to bring those two things together. That is the kaf ma'oznayim, the measuring out, the balance and stability that is required to bring individuals together, create a collective, and that there's an element of kfiyah there. There's an element of forcing, right? Let's give a very mundane example. Our forces, one of the most fundamental forces that we have to contend with is gravity. What if I want to fly in a plane? I need to create enough force that's going to be against the gravitational force of whatever it is that's pulling me, right? So if I want to fly, that means that the whole Earth, the entire Earth is pulling on my body right now. Even right this second, the entire Earth is pulling on my body. So that means that when I stand up, I need to exert more force than the entire Earth is pulling on me. There's an element of kfiyah. It's forcing, right? It's forcing the thing to go to stop going in its free fall direction. So again, bringing individual components together, being in a symbiotic flow type sequence, there's an element of kfiyah. There's an element of forcing, and that is the kfiyah within the kaf ma'oznayim, the forcing which is in the creation of balance and harmony. Hamila kfiyah. Right, okay. At the bottom of the page over here, mivneh v'tzurat ha'ot, the form of the letter itself. Hakaf eina mechuleket lifrakim. The kaf has no pieces. It's like each letter that we've seen until now, you can kind of break it down into components. But the kaf, you can't break it down into components. It's just one flowy, continuous line. In fact, how you write the kaf is kind of like that. There are some sofrim that they start at the top left, or the top left, and they just make like one half a circle like this. It's just one flowy motion. I don't think there's any other letter that's like that, right? Even the vav, you have to make the little kotzim at the end. So even though it's like a stick, you have to go back and kind of like put the little shpitzim on top. Yeah, but the kaf has no shpitzim. There's no protrusions, nothing. It's just one flowy line. It's very interesting. I never thought about that until now. The whole thing is literally one flowy line. That's it. Mitzuyeret kekaf ratzuf umeugal, that is rounded. It is alluding to this idea of the ritzifut, of the flowy nature of the pu'ula, of the movement. Or as Rav Kook puts it, Surat Hakaf Mareh Hemshech Echad, one continuity, lo pirkei pu'ula miuchadim, and not the components of the movement. It's not the components part. Obviously, there are components to every movement, but it's not the aspect of the components; it's the aspect of the flow that allows the components to come together. Surat Ha'ot, the shape of the letter itself. Ptucha lama sheyutzuar v'yitchadesh ba'atid. It is open to that which will come and be new in the future. Petuachu hakaf likrat kol koach mitchadesh. That's the lashon of Rav Kook that we read. Petuachu hakaf, the kaf is open likrat kol ma shemitchadesh, to everything that will be made new. Ma shelo yitgaleh b'mifalim ba'atid litgalot is also the language of Cook. That which has not yet been revealed, va'atid litgalot, but in the future it will be revealed. Mashu koach de'eno b'foal, that which is in potential but has not yet been actualized. Hakav klape mala, right now talking about the two parallel lines. Hakav klape mala chosem et hakochot haruchanim, places a stopper. It chosem. It cuts off. It cuts off from the spiritual forces. Shelo yikansu al mitziut v'yafriu la'peula ha'artzit militavot, that it won't come and cause distractions, la'afriya, to bother, to mess up. What's a good translation, la'afriya? To disturb. Thank you very much. To disturb, right? It's very interesting. The spiritual forces can disturb you from acting. Yeah, right. It's not all good over there in like the spiritual domain. You want to be able to like act at a certain point, and the spirituality is like an anti-acting thing. It gets you to be more insular, to retreat inward, to think, to contemplate.
Barrier.
What?
A barrier.
What's the barrier?
That top page.
Yes. That top piece is symbolizing a barrier. The person needs to make a conscious decision, right? A conscious decision in the sequence of acting, to not, right, to stop the thinking and the contemplating. Meaning, there's a thinking and contemplating stage. I think that's, by the way, most symbolized by like the Aleph letters, right? Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled are like much more contemplative. Thank you. Contemplative letters, right? About ideas and about the forces that are like beginning to emerge and the themes behind them. They're much more contemplative. But now we're getting into letters that are much more earthy, let's say, in their essence. So that right, at that point there needs to be a conscious decision to retreat from the spiritual contemplation and be more action oriented. And of course, hatachtel on the bottom, chosem et hakochot hagasim shel hachomer, all the material distractions that could also cause a person to stop the flow, but in the complete opposite way. So I think to sum this up, so we see that I wrote over here and in my in my notes in the book over here, chikuk ben hapratim, the fundamental friction between the specifics, right, between the different pratim that need to come together, doreshet l'shalvam, right, it requires forcing in order to integrate them. So I think that one very important takeaway of what he's mentioning in this kfiyah element is that things by their nature will act in such a way, if given too much space, the things will act in such a way that precludes the possibility for them to integrate with other things, if left to their own devices. I think that can be said like across the board, with everything in the world, certainly with individuals, right? If we're left to our own devices, we're not given guardrails. Yeah, it will preclude the ability for us to integrate with other people. Great line from Jordan Peterson. He says that sanity is something that you have to outsource, and what and what he means by that is that how do I know if I'm acting normally, quote unquote? The only way that you know that is by the feedback that you get from other people. Crashing against other things is how you know whether or not you're acting normally. Yeah. So again, being left to its own devices, any specific component will become unintegratable. Yeah.
One of the most personal questions of all is, do you snore?
Right. Well, hopefully that's not relevant in all contexts, but I mean, hopefully we want to be awake in most of our interactions. But there's an element of kfiyah to understand that there is a discomfort, right? Kfiyah, by definition, it means that you're being forced to do something that your nature by nature doesn't want to do. So there's a discomfort there. So there will be a feeling of discomfort that's required to temper or perhaps augment, right, what by itself will drift into an extreme. So there is a kfiyah, there is a forcing. We have to be conscious of that. There is a forcing element. And the other,
like on Har Sinai when we had
kafal is the same word. There you go. So you gave me a thought now. This is kind of related to Purim, but we're still in Adar, so we can say Purim Torah. The Maharal in his introduction to Or Chadash, which is his rather lengthy commentary on the Megillah, so he brings up the question of Tosfos on that Gemara in Masechah Shabbos and Daf Peches. So Tosfos asks, how can it be that God was kafa alem? He did a kaf on them with the mountain. Yeah, he did a os kaf on them. He forced them to accept the Torah. So how could it be that God forced them to accept the Torah? It already said that the Jewish people were asked whether or not they wanted to accept the Torah. And what did they say? Everyone knows what they said. Na'aseh v'nishma. They said, we'll do it. What was the forcing? It's like saying, yes, you shake on it, then you take out, they take out, you put a gun to the guy, right? We agreed already, right? So what's the forcing aspect? So Tosfos has an interesting answer. Tosfos' answer is that, yes, they agreed, but then when they got to the mountain and they saw the thunder and the lightning and the fire and they heard God speak, they chickened out. They got cold feet. So the forcing was to bring them back. It's kind of like, the guy goes, he climbs up the ladder to the diving board and he's all enthusiastic. And then when he gets to the top, he gets a little scared. So some guy needs to, gently push him off. Right? Yeah. So it's like you needed the forcing at the last. Okay, which is an interesting idea, right? Like you can come with your authentic will, but then the circumstances they kind of distract you. So you need the extra push. That's one possible answer. The Maharal says a different answer. So the Maharal says that no, they went in fully accepting the Torah. They wanted to do it. They were enthusiastic about it. They wanted to go, and everything was good. Why was it necessary to do this? What was essentially a charade by God, like a performance of Kaf Alem Har Gigis? It was in order to show that the acceptance of the Torah was not dependent on whether or not the Jewish people wanted to accept it or not. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if the Jewish people had just accepted it, it would be like, okay, well, in theory, if they didn't want to accept it, then they wouldn't have to do it. Meaning, it's totally dependent on whether or not they wanted to. This was to show, it was to embody and act out that the Torah is absolutely mukhrach. It's necessary. It's necessary for the existence of the world. It can't not be acted out. The Kaf Aleim Har Kegigis aspect, right? This component of Matan Torah, which was very intimidating, and it seemed like we were being forced. This Kaf Aleim Har Kegigis, by the way, it's not literally saying that the mountain was lifted up above their heads. It was a whole experience. It was being by the mountain. It was having this mass revelation and being in the awe and trepidation of the prophetic experience of Sinai. It's kind of intimidating, right? So it's that experience. You're seeing the hechrechiyut of the Torah, the absolute necessity of the Torah, and there's always a kfiyah element, right? As Chassidus teaches, it's a very, very fundamental teaching, especially in Chabad Torah, that the two modalities of progression in Avodas Hashem are what's called iskafia and ishafcha. Iskafia, kaf, right? To perform the kaf function. Yeah, on yourself. Iskafia, subjugation, and ishafcha, transformation. Subjugation and transformation. There's always the iskafia part, because there's always a component of the thing that if left to its own devices would not integrate. It doesn't want to integrate. It's spiritual entropy. It doesn't want to integrate. So there's an iskafia element. Again, iskafia doesn't necessarily mean like bashing the thing over the head with a club. No, it means direction. Right? It's like someone told me a great Torah about the idea of an ol. You talk about ol, right? Chazal talk about ol malchus shemaim, the yoke of heaven, right? Or the yoke of God, the yoke of Torah, right? The idea of the yoke, the main function of a yoke on an animal, even in the Torah, by the way, right? Even before Chazal, the term for someone who is completely without morals and completely free for all in his behavior is called bliyal, which literally means a person without an ol. Without a yoke, right? Hishamar lecha penye dvarecha penye dvar im levavecha bliyal, lest there be a bliyal thing in your heart, right? There should be no bliyal. You should have no aspect of your consciousness that's without a yoke. So what's a yoke? The primary function of a yoke is that it structures the animal to focus it to walk in a certain way, to focus it to walk in a straight line. That's like the primary function of the yoke. And they say, I don't have personal experience with this, but I've heard from people that work with animals that the animal actually prefers the yoke when it's doing work, meaning it feels more comfortable, so to speak, in that it's giving it direction. It knows like where it's going. It knows where it's going. Yeah. So the yoke is this iskafia element, right? Making sure that the individuality aspect of the individual doesn't make it non-sociable. Let's say it allows it to make friends. Yeah. So I think this is the underlying theme that we can take away, that the iskapia, the forcing component, is to be mindful, is to be self-aware of to what extent our individuality makes ourselves incompatible with things, to be mindful of that, and to make sure that iskapia, that this gentle forcing and refocusing allows the kaf, the igul, right, the flowy, right, nature of the kaf to integrate all the different components in a way that there is, right, a natural rounded shetef flow, as Rav Kook says.
Like the halachic concept of kofinoso.
That's interesting. That's also the same word, kofinoso, right? And we're talking about in Chazal, kofinoso. You force him. That's also right. The verb form of the word kaf.
What he really wanted, bring him back to what he really wanted.
So that's another discussion now. So Yishar Koach. Chizku v'am stavavchem kol ha'miyachalim l'Adonai. Your stream will stop immediately, and you will no longer be live. Okay, it's okay. I can accept that.
You're alive.
Well, when there's a red button.